Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarottam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjalimanatosmi laye sambodhayet chittam vikshiptam shamayet punaha sakashayam vijaniyat samapraptam na chalayet. Om. So in our last meeting, I gave a brief survey of the history of the philosophy of yoga. I mentioned that Patanjali was not the founder of the yoga philosophy, but actually he was the one who systematized all the thinking that was there until his time. So obviously the concept of yoga, the concept of physical yoga also, the hatha yoga, as well as the control the mind, has been the subject of contemplation and dhyana for even thousands of years, even before sage Patanjali. So we also saw that he was probably born in Punjab or Kandahar, Kabul area, which is in the present day Pakistan. Probably that is the area where Patanjali was born, and then he flourished. And there are legends that his mother, Gonika, was actually looking for getting a child, and Adishesha himself took form and became her son. And later legends also talk about miraculous powers of Patanjali. It appears that he never showed himself physically when he was teaching his students. So he would be seen all the other times. Only when he was in the class, then there would have been a screen in front of him and then between him and the students. So obviously there were curious, inquisitive students as to why our guru is sitting behind a screen, and one of them dared to peep behind the screen, and he found that it was actually the 1,000-headed Adishesha himself. So this is a dramatic legend. So there's also a metaphor in that. The 1,000 heads, head is the metaphorical location for our thoughts and various modifications of the thoughts. So how many chittavrittis could be there? How many kinds of modifications could be there? Though, of course, Yoga Shastra identifies 5 kinds of chittavrittis, but they manifest in infinite ways. And one snake holding on to all the 1,000 heads is again a metaphor to say that when there is the Shakti, when there is the Yoga Shakti, it is possible to control the myriad ways in which our mind functions. 1,000 in Sanskrit, Sahasra, is actually infinite. So one body controlling 1,000 heads as Adishesha is again to be understood as a yogi will be able to control all the kinds of modifications of his mind. So philosophically, what is the basic purpose of Yoga Shastra? It is to show us that it is absolutely possible to purify the mind. We'll say Mano Vishuddhi Marga. Manas is the mind, Vishuddhi is purification, Marga is the path. So this Mano Vishuddhi Marga should be designed in such a way that we are fit for the external world, the world of transactions, where we actually interact with the people, events, things in the outside world. And also we have got an inner world. We have an inner world of emotions, an inner world of thinking, and then harmonizing of the external world, what we call as antaranga, vahiranga, which is external, and antaranga, which is internal. So we also see the beautiful construction of the Sanskrit term Bahiranga and Antaranga itself. Ranga actually means a stage on which we actually enact a drama, or a play, or a dance. So it is actually a leela. It is on the ranga that many things happen. But it is not the true character of the persons who are on the ranga. So therefore, when we use the word antaranga and bahiranga, the stage inside us and the stage outside us is where we actually play the several roles. So when we are playing these roles, we are really not the us. We are actually donning various costumes and dancing and playing and speaking to a script, and that script written by a playwright whom Yoga Shastra calls as Ishvara. So when this is very clearly understood, then it is possible for purification of the mind and to be able to function effectively in the antaranga as well as in the bahiranga. So this is the philosophical basis of Yoga Shastra. Now, how is this possible? And therefore, we have to create a whole system. In the system where a man who is crushed by the challenges of life must be made into a Veera, must be made into a valorous person. And Yoga Shastra says every one of them can become a Veera. So the essence is that Yoga Shastra has to give ways to man not to be a passive person helplessly going through life's challenges. He must be trained to stand up to all the challenges that come in their life and without being crushed. And therefore, the spiritual valorous Veera, to make the man a spiritual hero who is active and then who is also capable of the potency of withstanding even the most difficult challenges. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Gurunapi na vishalyate, one who is unshaken by even the most difficult pressures of life. That's the purpose of Yoga Shastra. In the 12th century, there was a very great Jain monk. His name is Hemachandra. Actually, Hemachandra wrote an independent work on Yoga Shastra. There are a lot of ideas that he has taken from Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, and he was an extraordinary monk, he was a scholar and a mathematician actually, a great mathematician. He contributed a lot to Indian mathematics and also of philosophy, and he lived in Gujarat. And then he wrote in his Yoga Shastra. In Yoga Shastra, he gives a definition of who a Veera is. Visheshena irayati kshipati karmadin iti Veeraha. This is the etymology he gives. Visheshena, by means of his extraordinary capabilities. The word irayati, from which the letter ra comes, what that means is he is able to throw all the karmas that are accumulated with great efficiency, that they will never return back to him. And such a person is a Veera. So he expands his ideas by saying, Vidarayati yat karma. That means he melts away all the karmas. How? Tapasa, by means of meditation. And he thrives. Virajate. Then one who is repository of contemplation and this Veeratvam, tapo viryena yuktaha, tasmat veera iti smritaha. So the purpose of Yoga Shastra is to create a Veera out of every human being. So this is beautifully brought into a great story in the Yoga Vasishta. This is the story of a very, very beautiful woman and a great prince. This is the kingdom of Malwa. Malwa is somewhere in the Madhya Pradesh area. And in this kingdom of Malwa, there was a prince and his name was Shikhidhwaja. And this Shikhidhwaja was extraordinarily valorous, and he had great training, and he comes of age, 18, 19, 20 years old. And that was when he starts looking for a bride. And then they go all around looking for an appropriate bride. And then finally they find that in the Saurashtra, that is a little bit of west of Malwa kingdom, in the Saurashtra, which is again part of Gujarat today, in the Saurashtra kingdom, there was a princess by name Chudala. So Chudala, this would be a great theme for a dance drama, Smita. So Chudala and Shikhidhwaja, they actually meet and they fall in love, and then they actually court each other, and then they get married. And once they got married, Chudala and her husband Shikhidhwaja were greatly devoted to each other, and they were extraordinarily attached to each other. And of course, like any happy couple, for a long time, they were very attached to each other, and they had all the pleasures of life. Then slowly we do see that after probably 10, 15 years of having a lot of good time in the marriage, slowly the mind turns towards a little deeper aspects of life. And both Shikhidhwaja as well as Chudala were both very studious. And therefore they decide, okay, let us take our mutual love to a little next level. And the next level is, let us do some joint study of the scriptures. See, in true love between a husband and wife, this is what happens. In the initial days, of course, there will be physical attraction. And as time passes by, the blossoming of the husband and wife relationship will become more and more intellectual. In fact, many of the marriages are a little bit weak when there is no intellectual compatibility also between the two spouses. So, but then Shikhidhwaja and Chudala were of that class where both of them were very intellectual, and then they started studying the scripture, and they used to, and various texts, of course, not just scripture, but economics, finance, politics, management, every aspect that is required for running their country. And they were sharing their wisdom with each other, and both of them become highly learned in their own branches of knowledge. And then they both of them think, as well as the world that is looking at them, they think this must be a pair like Mahavishnu and Mahalakshmi, like Shiva and Parvati, who are so amorously attached to each other, but at the same time always contemplating on Loka Kalyana also. So that was their reputation. But then, of course, there cannot be an exact mapping of the personalities. Even though they studied pretty much the same scriptures, let us say they studied the same Upanishads, they studied the same Veda, they studied the same darshanas, but still, actually, Chudala, the wife, was a little more mature spiritually than her husband. All this scholarship, learning that Shikidhvaja got was actually converted into a little bit of confidence, of course, and then arrogance of his knowledge, and then the adoration that everybody was showing towards him about his scholarship. Also, little bit of ego and ahankara increased in his life. Whereas we have Chudala, who, as a queen, of course, was a little more free than her husband. She was contemplating and she was saying, who am I? Why is it that so many changes are happening? What is happening in my physical body? And what is this physical body? This physical body is not the self. It is surely inert. We are going to see all these things in the various sutra forms in the Yoga Sutra, but this is actually the philosophical basis of Yoga Shastra. First and foremost is contemplation. Tapasvadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhanani Kriya Yoga, as the second chapter says, tapas. Tapas means thinking. How does the thinking go? Chudala first of all looks at her whole body, and the body is wonderful. It has given us a lot of pleasure. So let us recap on all the wonderful food that we have eaten, and all the great places that we have gone together, and all the amorous dalliances that we have had in our married life. All these things, where exactly did we experience this pleasure? Where exactly? See, this is where Chudala started thinking. Then she looks at her body, and then no part of my body has got the memory of any of that. So it is only experienced in the mind. So where is the origin of all action? Is the origin of action in the body or is in the mind? It appears as though all actions are being done by the organs of the body, but actually it is all done in the mind. And the mind is using all the sense organs. So therefore, are the sense organs the real sentient entities in my personality? Then they say, no, it cannot be, because the sense organs also depend on the mind for its functioning. All the indriyas depend on the mind for its functioning, and therefore the mind thinks, the mind actually entertains the emotions and all that. But why does the mind do all these things? Because it is actually prompted by the buddhi. So is the buddhi really the locus of sentiency? And then she's now, all the background of the Shastra that she has done comes to her aid, and then she looks back and say, even the buddhi can be objectified. Since the buddhi can also, everything that can be objectified is a drishyam, and all that is drishyam cannot be the sentient entity. And therefore even the buddhi is also an inert object. So then where is the sentiency? Then she concludes that jiva, which is actually clothed by this buddhi, manas, indriyas, and then getting interested in the vishayas or the objects of the mind, all of these things, objects of the senses, all of these things are because the jiva has got entangled with these senses, sense organs, and sense objects. But the jiva is the sentient part. And now she says, I have now realized that it is this jiva which is clothed in all these external inert objects, things, but actually the consciousness within it. Drashtu swarupa. Drashtu, the seer, and not the drishya. And that is the self. That is the pure consciousness. So in this contemplation, she comes across this wisdom. Now you remember that Chudala and her husband are extremely devoted to each other. So while Shikidhwaja was going through his everyday duties, this discovery of Chudala she was sharing with her husband. And of course they are doing a lot of joint study. So slowly Shikidhwaja also realizes that yes, it is true. And therefore all these are trappings for me. The Indriya Vishayas are trapping. Indriyas trap me. Manas traps me. Buddhi traps me. All of these are trapping. And therefore I do not want to be in the environment which is tempting me to be stuck here. So he suddenly decides, okay, I'm going to renounce everything. And then I will go to the forest and become a monk. So please note, so far what has happened is the association of the husband and wife has made her husband Shikidhwaja fit for Bahiranga, isn't it? It made him fit for as an able administrator, as an expert king, as a learned person. All those things he made. But then in the middle of this enterprise, he drops and then he goes away to the forest. Now, this is uncooked, unprocessed knowledge. So anything that is consumed without completely cooking, you know what happens. It is definitely going to give us a indigestion and stomachache. So we have to cook all this study, all this learning thoroughly. And Chudala could not stop her husband from going to the forest. So he goes away. So in the meanwhile, Chudala continues her contemplation. So she goes through in the order in which the Yoga Sutra is designed. She understands by tapas, samadhi yoga, Then she does all the practices given to us in the second chapter, which is Sadhana Pada. And then after the Sadhana Pada, she also gains a lot of siddhis. Now, Yoga Shastra warns us that these siddhis have to be ignored. But Chudala has also shown that it is possible to use these siddhis again to support our yogic practice of control of the mind. Now, her husband is in the forest. He has become a monk. So Chudala is now never felt that she has been abandoned. What would any wife think in these circumstances? She would feel abandoned. But because her own Bahiranga and Antaranga sadhana, actually what happened, she became a much more contemplative person, a much more controlled person. And then when she actually goes in search of Shikidvaja and finds him in the forest, even looking at Chudala's luster, Shikidvaja is bewildered. Who is this? How is it she has got such a wonderful tejas? And then again asks her for advice. Please give me an advice. What should I do? Then she says, forest, this mendicant's life, this monk's life is not fit for you. You have to come back and resume your duties. So an argument ensues. I don't have to do it. I have renounced everything. She says, no, you have not renounced everything. True renunciation is the dispassionate feeling in the midst of activity. That's the true relation. That's the true renunciation. You have renounced nothing. You have only renounced your responsibilities. So therefore, you come back. But he didn't listen to her. So she uses her psychic powers. And she morphs herself because of the vibhuti that she got. She morphs herself and appears before her husband as a young ascetic boy. And as a young ascetic boy, she will go and speak to Shikidvaja. And Shikidvaja is absolutely impressed by the way in which this young boy was speaking. So, of course, he did not recognize that it is his wife using the vibhuti to change. Now, if he were in the city, in the court, and as a king, he would have access to a lot of learned people, isn't it? Now, where are the learned people? In the forest. So, Shikidvaja is actually worried. Yes, I have learned something, I have known these scriptures and all that, but I don't have a teacher who can take me to the next higher level. My education has stagnated at this point. So that was the right time. And Chudala in disguise says, I will be your teacher. And Shikidvaja is very, very happy about it. So then she instructs him in meditation and mind control. So she brings him back into the proper way of controlling the mind. And then he leaves her. She leaves him. Because again, as we see even in our basic management studies, a manager makes himself redundant. because you have to empower others to take that place. So you cannot hold the hand of your husband throughout. Even he has to do his own sadhana, and then he actually trains her, teaches her the Ashtanga Yoga, and then instructs him how to get into Samadhi, and then leaves him. He attains the Samadhi, and unfortunately, as he attained the Samadhi, he withdraws from the world even further. So the project for Chudala is not complete. So Chudala persists. Now, external teaching is not going to help Shikidvaja at all. He's a good student. He obeys the teacher, whatever the teacher says, but he cannot go to the next step. Why? Because the internal transformation of the intellect has not happened. So what can Chudala do? But please note, there is an undercurrent in all these things. The undercurrent is Chudala's immense love for her husband. Because if she did not have that depth of love for her husband, she wouldn't have done all these things. She would have happily stayed back in the capital, in the palace, and then she would have been an equally good queen. But because of her great love for her husband, now what she does is she enters into his body with her vibhuti, and then she tries to start awakening him from within. And this is Parakaya Pravesha you can think of. In a Parakaya Pravesha is a different thing. In Parakaya Pravesha, that body is dead. But here, she enters into the mind of the live husband. And from within, she works on the mind of the husband. And then she changes the whole design of her buddhi, brings him back to the capital. And when she brings him back to the capital, he fulfills all his duties with total detachment and dispassion. Continues to be a king, continues to rule, continues to manage, but all that he had learned, and now Chudala makes him fit for both the introspective life and the extrovert life. This is all a metaphor. All this is a metaphor. So when Ishvara's kripa happens, that is why Ishvara Pranidhana became an important aspect of Yoga Shastra, though it is completely dependent on Sankhya Darshana, which is an atheistic philosophy. So Ishvara, when Ishvara becomes the wife, this Ishvara, along with the teaching of the Yoga Shastra, what he does is creates a sadhana pattern. In the sadhana pattern, a person becomes fit for contemplative life as well as for the life in the world. And he stands in the silence in between. So this is the philosophical standpoint of Yoga Shastra. Now with this, the whole of the system builds. So what is the one aspect that we should constantly keep in mind? It is making us fit, both for the worldly life as well as for the introspective life. It is not one or the other. This is exactly what we see even in the Bhagavad Gita also. In the Bhagavad Gita also, there is no such thing, no binary thing. That's when Arjuna asked, Kim karmani ghore me niyojase Keshava. If you think that Jnana Marga is the perfect one, then why are you asking me to fight? So Chudala and Shikidhwaja's story from the Yoga Vasishtha gives a story framework as to how Yoga Shastra gets designed. That's why it is called as Yoga Vasishtha anyway. Vasishtha are talking about yoga through stories. So then, as I mentioned last week, Yoga Shastra is not a Jijnasa Grantha. It is not a text for argument discussion. Yoga Shastra is actually a instructional manual. There is no question of arguing why should it be like that, why should it be otherwise. It doesn't mean that it is taking away our independence of questioning. But the thing is, after all the questioning was done, ultimately a conclusion has been drawn that this is the only way with which a person can become fit for both the external life as well as the internal life. And therefore, this is a Upadesha Grantha. And all this is codified in one word, Atha. So that's the first word with which the Yoga Shastra starts, Atha Yoga Anuशाsanam. So how exactly we should interpret the word Atha, that we will see in our next class. But here, let us take about the background, philosophical background or Tattva Shastra background of Yoga Shastra. So first and foremost, important point is Yoga Darshana is a practical manual. It is a sadhana grantha. But no sadhana will become successful without the theoretical basis or the Tattva Shastra basis. So what exactly is the Tattva Shastra basis? The Tattva Shastra basis is Sankhya. So what does this Sankhya, we already pointed out, the difference is Sankhya does not have Ishvara, whereas Yoga Darshana has got a Ishvara. So according to the Tattva background, philosophical background of Yoga Shastra, there are three fundamental principles. And those three fundamental principles are Ishvara, infinite number of sentient beings called Purushas. Then the third one, it is called as Pradhana or Prakriti. So three entities are to be understood in the philosophy of yoga. So first let us start with the Purushas. Purusha means person. Person means what? A person is the one who is a sentient being. And how many sentient beings are there? According to Yoga Shastra, as many sentient beings are there in the universe, so many Purushas are there. It is not just human beings, it is even gods, Rakshasas, insects, creatures. Whoever has got sentiency is a Purusha, and it is infinite. Principle number one. Number two is Prakriti has no sentiency, Achetanam, and it is also an inert object. Third entity, who is Ishvara? Who is Ishvara? This Ishvara is a special person who is omniscient. So what do you mean by special person? What is the speciality about Ishvara? Like other Purushas, he is also sentient, common. But unlike all the Purushas, Ishvara is not bound by karma. And then he is independent of karma. If he is independent of karma, means he is also independent of Prakriti. The reason is only when the interaction between a Purusha and Prakriti occurs, karma occurs. Isn't it? Only when we are in the world there is action. When there is no interaction with the world, where is action? Where is any activity when we are in deep sleep? Because there is no contact with the outside world in deep sleep. But it doesn't mean that Ishvara is in deep sleep. We should not infer, because Ishvara is independent of Prakriti. He is the overlord of Prakriti, indicated by Om, but he is pure Chaitanya Swarupa, because Prakriti has certain characteristics, and that Prakriti's characteristics are Sattva, Rajas and Tamo Gunas. Now, what is the characteristic of Prakriti is being analyzed. What is the character of Purusha? Innumerable, infinite. And Purushas are sentient. What is the characteristic of Ishvara? Ishvara is sentient but not bound by Prakriti. He is independent and he is indicated by Om. Individual is not indicated by Om. So difference between Purusha and Ishvara has been established. What are the characteristics of Prakriti according to yoga philosophy? It is made up of the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamo gunas. Then these Sattva, Rajas, Tamo gunas create the bondage between Prakriti and Purusha, not Prakriti and Ishvara. So the question again goes back to the fundamentals, saying that why should the innumerable Purushas get bound by karma? For what purpose? Yoga philosophy identifies two reasons for that. One reason is it may be the will of Ishvara, or it may be because of prarabdha karma. These two also we have to very carefully think through. Why should Ishvara will to bring into manifestation a Purusha? Why should he do that? It is because sometimes another Purusha has to be embedded among the Purushas to be instructed. So think of an avatara, think of people like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Vivekananda. They are who are introduced as a Purusha by the will of God, as differentiated from Purushas who have taken birth because of prarabdha karma. This is the hope that Yoga Sutra gives. There are people who actually need not take birth because of they have no prarabdha karma whatsoever, but because of Ishvarecha, they are placed among the human beings. So this is what, remember, we also saw in Vivek Chudamani, where Adi Shankara says, Shanto Mahanto Nivasanti Santaha Vasantavallokahitam Charantaha Anyamscha. What does Shankara say? Shantaha. They are absolutely peaceful. Mahantaha. Inside they are great. Nivasanti. They are there amidst us. They are Satpurushas. And how do they move about? Vasantavallokahitam Charantaha. They move about like the spring, bringing joy and happiness to everybody. And then what do? Not only they are liberated, but they also liberate others for no reason. Adi Shankara says they liberate others for no reason. So how can those be such souls? How can such souls, jivas, take birth as a Purusha if it was other than Ishvara's Ichcha? Isn't it? So look how beautiful is this background philosophy of Yoga Shastra. So therefore, Ishvarecha or Jivatma's prarabdha karma, Purushas are there. Now these Purushas, whether they are liberated and for the sake of good of the world they are there amidst us, or they are taken birth due to prarabdha karma, they also have to work off the karma. Sukha dukkha anubhava has to take place. And Sukha Dukkha Anubhava, how does a special Purusha experience and how does every other Purusha experience? That contrast also has to be created. Now who creates that contrast? Prakriti creates that contrast. That's why the Yoga Shastra philosophy establishes the necessity for Prakriti. And this Prakriti again has to be so designed that whatever be the level of prarabdha karmas of the individual, they must have the appropriate tool to overcome that prarabdha karma. And therefore a gradation of manifestation of Prakriti also has to be created. So what does yoga philosophy establish? It says that the Prakriti consists of Mahat, Ahankara, Panchatanmatras. In the 5 elements, gross elements, 5 subtle elements, and also the mind, and the modifications that happen in this combination, this Jagat has to be created. So Yoga Shastra validates Jagat also. Now, in this dynamic, unfortunately, the unenlightened Purusha, even though he is a Chaitanya Swarupa, because of aviveka, lack of discrimination, later on he is going to talk about Viveka Khyati, because of lack of discrimination, Purusha completely identifies himself with the Prakriti. The technical term used is Tadatmyam. Tat Atma Mama Atma. The essence of the Prakriti is my essence. That's the word Tadatmyam. It makes a Tadatmyam. So Prakriti, Deha, Indriya, all of that, the mind gets entangled with that. As long as this entanglement is there, this jiva will go through klesha. Klesha, he will define in the second chapter. He will go through this klesha. He will get into entanglement of the cycle of karma, janana, marana, samsara. He will continue. So we have to purify the mind. Again, look back to my first statement when I said purification of the mind is the goal of Yoga Shastra. Manashuddhi is the goal of Yoga Shastra. How does Manashuddhi takes place? It is where Yoga Anga has been introduced in Yoga philosophy, the Ashtanga Yoga. So because of Ashtanga Yoga Anushtana, that is diligent following of the Yoga Anga Anushtana, a person acquires Viveka Khyati. So what is the meaning of Viveka Khyati? Chaitanya Swarupa I is different from Jada Swarupa Prakriti. And this we already know intellectually. But to bring it into Anubhava, the only way it can be done is through the Ashtanga practice. When the Ashtanga practice becomes perfect, a person becomes free from the samsara chakra and establishes himself in one's own Swarupa, Tada Drashta Swarupe Avasthanam, and then attains Kaivalyam. If you go to 4th chapter, 34th sutra, and then connect it with 2nd chapter and 28th sutra, these two sutras actually give you this statement that I gave. It has to be read in conjunction. So therefore, yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. And this chitta vritti nirodha, when this chitta vritti nirodha has been attained, then next question always arises in our mind: what is this chitta? What is this vritti? How do you define this? This chitta is none other than a combination of antahkarana. Karana means tool, limb, organ. Outside karanas are our hands, feet, etc. But we also have an inner karana, antahkarana. This antahkarana is mind, emotions, manas, intellect, buddhi, the sense of individuation, ahankara, memory. All these are combined in combination called as chitta. So the Yoga Sutra defines chitta as chetati anena iti chittam. In other words, through this, all knowledge of things accrues to the Purusha. How do we know anything? It is only through this chitta. But the nature of this chitta is, natural state of this chitta is to be calm. But what happens is, just like a lake, which is naturally calm, if we throw a pebble, then it will start showing ripples. And therefore, Vishaya Indriya Samyoga. So let's introduce another technical term. Vishaya means objects, Indriya means senses. When Indriyas and Vishaya come together, then what happens? Two reactions will be there in our mind. One is called thinking or yochana, and the second is called feeling or bhavana. Whenever there is yochana and bhavana, the mind gets disturbed. It may be disturbed as something that you feel joyous about, or it may be a disturbance for which you are not happy about. So therefore, the Yoga Shastra also has to create a methodology of identifying such waves of thoughts. So the only way they can do is by providing what is known as pramana. Pramana means proof. Prama means knowledge. So they have to identify the tools by which knowledge can be crystallized. Crystallization of knowledge has to take place in two ways. One is receiving information, another is validating the information as correct or incorrect. So for this, Yoga Shastra introduces three groups of pramanas, which is called as Pratyaksha, Anumana and Agama. These three it will introduce. Then the Yoga Sutra goes on to identify how and to what extent this chitta gets disturbed by Vishaya Samyoga. Purusha, Vishaya, Samyoga. Purusha, the being, Vishaya, the subjects of the world. What ripples will occur, it has to show. Then it has to talk about how to control it, and therefore it has to talk about Abhyasa and Vairagya. And then it has to say that once you have achieved one pointed focus, that's called ekagra. In this ekagra, only the object of meditation and the meditator, only two things are known. This is called as samprajnata samadhi. Samprajnata means identification of only two is there. That is the object of meditation and I, the meditator. And in the samadhi state, it becomes asamprajnata samadhi, where the individual also loses his identity, only the one exists. So, sounds beautiful, but is it easy to do? The answer is no, because the Prakriti has its own design, so it throws many curves in our life, and these are called as antaraya. We are going to see antaraya. Antarayati iti antaraya. That is the etymology of the word. That is, in between my state of peace, something comes. Me, that is I, the pure I, and my mind, something enters to disturb the mind and make me forget myself. And that is called as an antaraya. These antarayas, Patanjali Maharshi in the Yoga Sutra identifies, and he also gives us the antidote to overcome these antarayas. And each one of these have to be practiced very diligently, and it is called as pratipaksha bhavana. That is, whenever we are confronted with something that disturbs us, because of practice and dispassion, we should be able to create the counterweight, and the counterweight of Maitri, Karuna, Upeksha and Mudita, which we will see later on. And then once these antarayas are all removed by means of all these techniques, the chitta vrittis are all controlled, and then when we have achieved the ekagrata and samadhi, and then many tools have been given, mainly abhyasa and vairagya, and the Ashtanga Yoga is given. When all these things are there, some siddhis also accrue, just as we saw in the story of Chudala. And those siddhis, when it is used for Loka Kalyana, then those siddhis become very useful. Just like, look at Hanuman's life. All the siddhis that Yoga Sutra talks about, Hanumanta has been picturized in Ramayana. And then all those siddhis are used only for the sake of Loka Kalyana only. And then when this samyama has been achieved and Ishvara Pranidhana has been perfected, then a person attains Kaivalya or Moksha. So what is the Lakshana, or what is the nature? How do you identify that a person has achieved Kaivalya? So, whenever a person is free from the pressures of Sukha, Dukkha, Moha, which is internal mental aberrations, Prakriti's Sattva Rajas Tamo Gunas cause my Sukha, Dukkha, Moha. That has got to be experienced. Prakriti's Sattva Rajas Tamo Guna coupled with time, causation, what happens is it will create Janma, taking birth, Jara, old age, Vyadhi, sickness, Marana. All these things are caused by the Trigunas of the Prakriti. And because of this Prakriti, which is constantly reformatting the combination of Sattva, Rajas, Tamo Gunas, Sukha and Dukkha are all having, but a yogi, because of all this training, will be completely reposing in the Chaitanya Swarupa, and he becomes a Gunatita. We can call him as a Gunatita, we can call him as a mature Bhakta, we can call him as a Sthita Prajna, and all of these things are the names given for one who has achieved this state of Kaivalya. So therefore, the Yoga Sutra, while establishing the various methods as well as the Upadesha Grantha, is solidly established in philosophy. And in this philosophy, on the surface it looks like dualistic, on the surface it looks like, but if we go really deeper, when we adopt all these methodologies, a person can become one with the wisdom, the Viveka Khyati Vilakar. So this is the overview of the philosophy of Yoga Sutra. So from our next week, we will actually go into the individual sutras. Mainly, we will depend upon a couple of the commentaries, like Vyasabhashya, and then I will probably be referring to 6 or 7 Sanskrit commentaries and try to present to you the very best thinking of all those. So we will also study the etymology of the various words, and then we will see what Patanjali Maharishi has to teach to us this second time. And of course, some of you who might not have been there in our earlier class, please don't be threatened by this intense conversation of today. So we will actually study in easy, systematic, easily understandable, and then which we can put it into practice way. But this philosophical basis is a background we should always have while we are studying Yoga Sutra.